During the 19th century BC, ancient Egypt basked in a golden age of peace, prosperity, and centralized authority under the reign of the 12th dynasty. Among the grand temples, carefully engineered canals, and well-ordered administration, one event would disrupt the carefully maintained continuity of male-dominated kingship. A woman, Sobekneferu, would wear the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt. Her story was not born out of ambition, but necessity. After the death of her brother and husband, Amenemhat IV, who ruled for only 9 years and left no heir, the royal court stood at a crossroads. The absence of a male successor left Egypt vulnerable to chaos, division, and the erosion of everything the 12th dynasty had built over generations. It was then that Sobekneferu, sister, daughter, queen, and widow, emerged not just as a placeholder but as a fully titled pharaoh, the first woman in Egyptian history to claim that role by name and inscription. This was no mere regency or temporary stewardship. Sobekneferu adopted all 5 names of the traditional royal titulary. She used the title, Son of Ra, donned the royal headdress, wore the ceremonial kilt, and stood as the divine bridge between gods and man, roles that had for over 1,000 years been strictly assigned to men alone. Her name, Sobekneferu, meant the beauty of Sobek, aligning herself with the crocodile god revered during the Middle Kingdom as a symbol of fertility, military prowess, and the power of inundation. By invoking Sobek, a god known to inspire awe and fear, she cloaked her reign in sacred legitimacy. Much of what we know of Sobekneferu is drawn from fragments, scarabs, seals, and inscriptions, but their message is unmistakable. She was not a queen pretending to be pharaoh. She was pharaoh, though the Abydos king list omits her name. Along with every other female ruler, both the Karnak king list and the Saqqara tablet confirm her place in royal succession. She was a bold anomaly in an otherwise unyielding patriarchal structure. Yet, she was not a usurper. Her rise came through a lineage that tied her directly to the most powerful ruler of the Middle Kingdom, Amenemhat III, her father. His reign of over 40 years had brought the Nile Valley unmatched stability. Sobekneferu was his daughter, a product of divine favor and royal bloodline, and her ascension, though controversial, served as a lifeline to preserve dynastic continuity. Some sources suggest she may have also been Amenemhat IV's wife, an incestuous union not uncommon among Egyptian royalty, intended to consolidate divine blood and prevent power from seeping into rival families. But such unions came with their own curse. Generations of inbreeding left pharaohs vulnerable to disease, short lifespans, and mental fragility. As the succession chain grew increasingly fragile, the kingdom teetered on the brink of instability. Sobekneferu's 3-year and 10-month reign, though brief, held that crumbling structure together. She enhanced her father's mortuary complex at Hawara, a site that would later astonish even the Greek historian Herodotus, who described its labyrinthine chambers as surpassing the grandeur of the pyramids themselves. Sobekneferu did not disguise her femininity, even as she wore the attire of kings. Damaged statues show her in a male kilt draped over a female dress, a visual metaphor of duality, balancing tradition and identity. Her decision to adopt male royal regalia, including the headdress and false beard, was not an attempt to deceive but to honor the sacred symbols of kingship and possibly pacify those who viewed her reign as an affront to Ma'at, the goddess of truth, order, and divine balance. In ancient Egypt, pharaoh was not merely a political role but a spiritual office, believed to be the earthly incarnation of Horus, the falcon-headed male god. The very theology of kingship was male. To insert a woman into this role was to challenge the very foundations of Egyptian belief. And yet, Sobekneferu ruled. She kept Egypt from fracturing. And though her tomb has never been found, some suggest an unfinished pyramid at Masguna may have been intended for her. Her legacy lives on in the seismic cracks she left in the foundations of tradition. She concluded the 12th dynasty and, in the eyes of many Egyptologists, marked the end of the Middle Kingdom's golden age. But her daring set a precedent that would echo centuries later in the form of an even greater queen, one who would refuse to step aside, who would wield divine right not as a caretaker but as a builder of empires. Her name was Hatshepsut, and her reign would shatter every notion of female limitation in the ancient world. Roughly 3 centuries after the reign of Sobekneferu, Egypt once again found itself at the edge of a dramatic transition. In the early 15th century BC, following the expulsion of the Hyksos and the unification of the kingdom under Pharaoh Ahmose I, the new kingdom began, the most powerful era in all of ancient Egyptian history. It was during this time that a young girl named Hatshepsut was born into the royal household of Pharaoh Thutmose I and Queen Ahmose. Her name meant, foremost of noble ladies, and history would prove that she lived up to that title. Hatshepsut's childhood was marked by tragedy and fate. Her 2 brothers died young, leaving her as the only full-blooded royal child of Thutmose I. As per custom, to strengthen the dynastic line and legitimize royal succession, she was married at the age of 12 to her half-brother, Thutmose II. Though he was the son of a lesser wife, his claim to the throne was secured through Hatshepsut's royal blood. Together, they had a daughter named Nefertiti, but it was Thutmose II's son by another wife, Thutmose III, who would later be declared heir. When Thutmose II died unexpectedly around 1479 BC, his son and designated successor was still a toddler. As was tradition, Hatshepsut stepped in as queen regent, ruling on behalf of the child king. But what began as a regency soon evolved into a revolution. After 7 years of carefully consolidating power, building alliances with powerful officials, and strategically embedding herself into the core of Egypt's spiritual narrative, Hatshepsut declared herself pharaoh. This was no mere assumption of authority. It was a complete transformation. She claimed divine birth from the god Amun himself, declaring that her father, Thutmose I, had been possessed by the deity on the night of her conception, thus establishing her divine legitimacy. With the backing of high priests, temple officials, and key political figures, including her close confidant and possible lover, Senenmut, Hatshepsut became one of the most powerful women in human history. But power in Egypt was not just about blood or belief. It was also about image. To quell dissent and overcome societal norms that rejected female leadership, Hatshepsut adopted the iconography of male kingship. She was depicted with a flat chest, wearing the ceremonial false beard, the Nemes headdress, and the Shendit kilt. Yet in her inscriptions, she remained distinctly female, often referring to herself as the daughter of Ra, and God's wife of Amun. This paradox, presenting herself as male in form but retaining female pronouns and identity, allowed her to walk a delicate line between traditional expectations and revolutionary rule. She understood the power of visual and religious propaganda, and she used it masterfully. Rather than engage in constant military campaigns like her predecessors, Hatshepsut focused on economic expansion and architectural grandeur. One of her most legendary accomplishments was the trade expedition to the mysterious land of Punt, a realm no Egyptian had visited for over 500 years. Led by a fleet of ships laden with gifts and guided by divine direction, the expedition returned with a wealth of exotic goods: gold, ivory, myrrh, frankincense, ebony, and living trees, transplanted from Punt and replanted in Egyptian soil. These trees were the first recorded instance of successful botanical transportation in history. The images of this expedition, carved into the walls of her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahri, portrayed her not just as a ruler but as a visionary whose influence extended across seas and ecosystems. That temple, Djeser, the Holy of Holies, became one of the crowning architectural achievements of ancient Egypt. Built into the cliffs of Thebes, it was designed as a sacred place of worship, burial, and legacy. The temple's narrative reliefs told the story of her divine birth, her right to rule, and the wonders brought back from Punt. This architectural masterpiece inspired generations of pharaohs, but none ever surpassed its harmony, grandeur, and spiritual depth. Hatshepsut's reign also saw the construction of obelisks, colossal statues, and temple complexes that affirmed both her power and piety. One of the obelisks she erected at the Temple of Karnak still stands today, the tallest surviving obelisk in Egypt. For over 2 decades, Hatshepsut ruled Egypt in peace, prosperity, and cultural flowering. She preserved the throne for Thutmose III, naming him commander of the army and ensuring his future succession. And yet, years after her death in 1458 BC, her images were systematically defaced, her statues toppled, and her name chiseled from inscriptions. The motivations behind this campaign of erasure remain debated. Some argue that Thutmose III, upon consolidating power, resented being overshadowed during his formative years and sought to reclaim his legacy. Others believe the true reason was political, not personal. Egypt's priesthood and ruling class may have feared that her successful reign would embolden future queens to seek the crown. In a society that worshipped Ma'at, balance, harmony, and the natural order, a woman ruling as king was considered a rupture. To prevent such disorder from recurring, her memory had to be removed. But Hatshepsut's story could not be buried. Her statues were hidden, not destroyed, and her inscriptions, though damaged, remained legible. Modern archaeology has restored her narrative and revealed a ruler of intellect, faith, vision, and unrelenting strength. She was buried in the Valley of the Kings, the second pharaoh to be buried there after her father, sealing her place among the greatest rulers of the new kingdom. Through bloodline, divine claim, artistic manipulation, and administrative excellence, Hatshepsut transformed Egypt and redefined what it meant to be pharaoh. She ruled not in spite of her womanhood, but through it. She did not borrow power, she embodied it. By the 14th century BC, the grandeur of the new kingdom had reached both spiritual intensity and political instability. It was during this time that the most radical religious transformation in ancient Egyptian history unfolded, driven not by a priesthood, but by a revolutionary couple, Pharaoh Akhenaten and his great royal wife, Nefertiti. Though the crown had always passed through divine bloodlines and was worn exclusively by men, Egypt was about to be shaken again by the rise of a woman whose beauty, charisma, and spiritual authority would redefine the balance of power and belief. Nefertiti's origins remain cloaked in mystery. Some theories suggest she was the daughter of the influential court official Ai, while others link her to foreign royalty, such as the Mitanni princess Tudukipa. Even her name, the beautiful woman has come, has led many to speculate about a non-Egyptian origin. What is known, however, is that she married the young prince Amenhotep IV and became the most powerful woman in Egypt when he ascended the throne and changed his name to Akhenaten. From the beginning, Nefertiti's role was unique. She was not a passive consort, nor merely the mother of heirs. She was an active participant in one of the most sweeping spiritual revolutions the world had seen. Together, Akhenaten and Nefertiti rejected the traditional pantheon of Egyptian gods, dismantled the mighty priesthood of Amen, and elevated a single deity, Aten, the sun disk, to supreme and exclusive worship. This was not simply religious reform, it was monotheism, centuries before its time. They constructed a new capital, Akhetaten, modern-day Amarna, where all worship, political discourse, and artistic expression revolved around Aten. Temples to other gods were defaced or destroyed, inscriptions were altered, and the names of long-revered deities were erased from monuments. At the center of this new order stood Nefertiti, not as an accessory to the king, but as a divine intermediary, co-ruler, and, eventually, pharaoh in her own right. Nefertiti's imagery throughout this period is striking. In numerous reliefs and sculptures, she appears in equal size and posture as Akhenaten, often in scenes of royal and divine activity. She is shown conducting religious rituals, receiving the rays of Aten, driving chariots, and even smiting enemies, iconography traditionally reserved for the king alone. These depictions were not accidents, they were deliberate affirmations of her power. In the official art of the Amarna period, Nefertiti is sometimes portrayed more prominently than Akhenaten himself. Her crown, a tall, flat-topped blue headdress, became one of the most iconic symbols in Egyptian art, reflecting not only her beauty but her commanding presence. Her titles were numerous and significant. Great of Praises, Lady of Grace, Sweet of Love, Mistress of Upper and Lower Egypt, and High Priestess of Aten. Through these roles, she personified the ideal of divine femininity, fertility, wisdom, and royal strength. Together, Nefertiti and Akhenaten had 6 daughters: Meritaten, Meketaten, Enkhesenamen, Neferneferuaten Tasheret, Nefernefer, and Setepenra. While sons were absent from their union, their daughters played prominent roles in court life and ceremonial functions. Nefertiti's influence extended through these daughters, particularly Enkhesenamen, who would later marry the boy king Tutankhamun. The court at Amarna was unlike any other in Egyptian history. Daily life revolved around the worship of Aten, portrayed in art as a solar disk whose rays ended in hands, offering the Ankh, the breath of life, to the royal family. In these scenes, Nefertiti is often depicted as the conduit of Aten's blessing, sometimes more central than even Akhenaten. The religious cult they built made them not only rulers but living gods. As high priestess and divine partner, Nefertiti stood at the center of spiritual and temporal authority. However, beneath the surface of this divine order, political tension simmered. The radical dismantling of the old religious system alienated powerful institutions, especially the priesthood of Amen. Their sudden loss of wealth, influence, and temples made them bitter enemies of the new regime. While the people outwardly conformed, many retained secret devotion to the old gods. Temples, scrolls, and artifacts dedicated to Amen and others were hidden by faithful priests, preserved from the iconoclasm of Akhenaten and Nefertiti. This quiet resistance would eventually contribute to the collapse of the Amarna revolution. But for a time, Nefertiti held Egypt in her hands. After Akhenaten's death, believed to have occurred around 1336 BC, Egypt faced a succession crisis. The crown could not go to one of their daughters, and there was no son by Nefertiti. Yet the throne did not fall into disarray, because Nefertiti herself may have assumed the role of pharaoh. There is scholarly debate about the identity of a pharaoh who ruled briefly after Akhenaten, named Neferneferuaten, possibly a regnal name taken by Nefertiti. Others speculate that she ruled under the male name Smenkhkare, possibly in disguise or as a co-ruler. The ambiguity surrounding her final years only adds to her mystique. Regardless of the name, the consensus is that Nefertiti took on the full authority of kingship, perhaps even ruling alone until Tutankhamun was old enough to ascend. If true, she would become the 5th woman in Egypt's 3,000-year history to hold the title of pharaoh. Her position at this point was unprecedented. Nefertiti, the queen of divine revolution, the mother of royal daughters, the embodiment of Aten's light, had become the supreme ruler of Egypt. But her reign, like her husband's, ended in mystery. Historical records of her abruptly disappear. Some believe she died of natural causes. Others suggest she was assassinated or forced into exile due to political backlash. One chilling possibility is linked to a letter discovered in the Hittite royal archives. In it, a widowed Egyptian queen wrote to the Hittite king Suppiluliuma I, pleading for one of his sons to marry her and become pharaoh. "I have no son. I do not wish to marry a subject of mine. Send me one of your sons," she wrote. The Hittite prince Zananza was dispatched, but he was murdered en route to Egypt. Some historians believe this desperate letter came from Nefertiti herself, in a final effort to secure her rule. If true, the implications are staggering. A queen of Egypt requesting a foreign prince as husband and ruler would have been considered an act of treason. Such a move may have sparked outrage from the court and priesthood, leading to her removal, or her death. Whatever the cause, Nefertiti vanished from history. Her burial site remains undiscovered. Some suspect she was interred alongside Akhenaten at Amarna, while others believe she lies in an undisclosed tomb within the Valley of the Kings. Despite the efforts to erase her memory, her name and image survived through the bust discovered at Amarna, an exquisite limestone sculpture now preserved in Berlin's Neues Museum. The bust, with its perfectly symmetrical features and timeless expression, has become a global icon of beauty and power. Through it, Nefertiti continues to gaze through the centuries, not just as a queen of Egypt, but as a symbol of divine femininity, sacred rebellion, and enduring mystery. The legacy of Egypt's female pharaohs, Sobekneferu, Hatshepsut, and Nefertiti, is not merely etched into stone or sealed within tombs. It lives on as a testament to divine disruption in a world dominated by male lineage, priestly tradition, and patriarchal succession. These women were not accidents of history, nor mere placeholders. They were chosen by fate, by blood, and perhaps by divine ordination, to take the throne at pivotal moments of national uncertainty. Their stories unveil a hidden pattern in Egypt's spiritual fabric. When kingdoms faltered, when the gods seemed distant, and when men failed to preserve divine order, it was the sacred feminine that emerged to restore the balance. Sobekneferu rose in a time of succession collapse, bridging two dynasties and preserving the legitimacy of kingship through her courage and calculation. Hatshepsut seized power not through war but through divine identity, reshaping Egypt's theology and architectural grandeur. Nefertiti dared to become the living embodiment of the sun's light, leading one of the most radical religious movements ever seen. And yet, their greatness was often followed by erasure. After Sobekneferu, Egypt would avoid naming another woman as pharaoh for over 1,000 years. Hatshepsut's name was chiseled out, her images shattered, and her monuments defaced, not because she failed, but because she succeeded too greatly. Nefertiti's fate is still one of the deepest mysteries in Egyptology. Her name, her tomb, her rule, all remain contested, elusive, as if she ascended beyond the mortal records and into myth. But perhaps that is the point. The sacred feminine in ancient Egypt was not meant to follow the patterns of men. It emerged when the spiritual and political soil cracked open, when new light needed to break through. These women were not just rulers. They were revelations. Their reigns each carried a whisper of divinity, a sense of prophetic timing. Sobekneferu took the throne after the disappearance of Amenemhat IV, during a time of dynastic breakdown. Her rule stabilized a crumbling order and ushered in the 13th dynasty. Hatshepsut stepped into the vacuum left by the early death of her husband and nephew, asserting herself as the living daughter of Amen, crowned by prophecy and priestly vision. Nefertiti, as the light of Aten, held the reins of monotheism when Egypt turned its face from the old gods. In each case, their emergence was not accidental, it was divine intervention disguised in royal regalia. They were not mere queens. They were chosen vessels of cosmic realignment. In many ways, their ascension mirrors the ancient Egyptian concept of Ma'at, the universal principle of truth, balance, and cosmic justice. When chaos threatened, Ma'at had to be restored. And sometimes, it was restored through a woman's voice, vision, and rule. The divine order of Egypt was never simply political. Pharaohs were not just rulers. They were intermediaries between gods and men. This was the weight these women bore, to be divine figures, spiritual leaders, and political saviors all at once. The gods did not limit themselves to choosing men. In their infinite design, they called forth women who would not only rule, but awaken nations. This divine appointment often came at a cost. Sobekneferu's reign, though stabilizing, ended without heirs. Hatshepsut's legacy was buried in sand and silence for over 2 millennia. Nefertiti's memory was nearly lost in the smoke of political backlash and religious reversal. But what they left behind was far greater than titles or tombs. They left behind echoes, vibrations of divine rebellion. A reminder that when God moves through history, he chooses vessels by purpose, not gender. Modern Egyptology is slowly rediscovering the full extent of their legacies. Archaeologists, historians, and spiritual scholars alike are reassembling their narratives, piecing together fragments that for centuries lay forgotten or intentionally destroyed. The bust of Nefertiti, the obelisks of Hatshepsut, the inscriptions of Sobekneferu, all point to lives that carried a divine spark too bright for their time. In truth, these women were ahead of their age. They challenged the structure, transcended expectation, and held the scepter as both queens and prophets. They ruled not just with diplomacy or decree, but with revelation. Their stories are not isolated anomalies but spiritual landmarks, guiding future generations to understand the feminine power in divine timing. Even in the modern world, their shadows stretch long. Feminine leadership, divine agency, and sacred authority continue to echo through global conversations. And as more lost queens are unearthed, both literally and symbolically, the message becomes clearer. There is no true restoration of divine order without the inclusion of the feminine. Egypt's spiritual blueprint always included the goddess alongside the god, the priestess beside the priest, the queen beside, or above, the king. In Isis and Osiris, Hathor and Ra, Sekhmet and Ptah, we see a dual design: strength and wisdom, fire and grace, action and intuition. Sobekneferu, Hatshepsut, and Nefertiti were not exceptions to this cosmic pattern. They were the fulfillment of it. And so, we must ask ourselves, why were their names buried? Why their temples defiled, their images struck from stone? The answer lies not in failure but in fear. Fear of what happens when the divine feminine rises in full power. Fear of what shifts when women stand not behind but upon the throne. Fear of the sacred mystery they carry. Because when women rule with divine calling, the old structures tremble. Thrones are redefined, altars are rebuilt, and empires must choose whether to resist or awaken. These queens did not simply rule Egypt, they awakened it. And though their tombs may lie hidden, their presence still walks among the sands, the stars, and the souls who dare to remember. The story is not over. Perhaps one day, the tomb of Nefertiti will be found, perfectly preserved with gold, prophecy, and untold truths. Perhaps more evidence of Sobekneferu's reign will rise from the desert. Perhaps Hatshepsut's shattered statues will be fully restored. But whether stone speaks or not, the spirit speaks. The legacy of God's chosen daughters cannot be silenced. For in every age where darkness looms, where kingdoms falter and the gods seem far, one truth remains: God still raises queens. And when he does, they do not merely rule, they reveal.